Oh, yeah, theology nerds. This is Trip, and I am with the Bo Daddy. And we're going to nerd out with our
We're
geeks
back
out.
in the podcast studio.
Ooh, I know. It's freezing cold, Bo.
Yeah.
I thought about it, but it's 27 degrees outside. I don't think my ice fishing tent would be a good podcasting studio at 27.
Yeah. There are limits to everything.
But I did get a new Bluetooth microphone
Oh.
that will make it a lot easier to set up. I can just connect it to the iPad, use the Bluetooth mic, and keep the iPad plugged in so it doesn't, like, the battery doesn't go out in the middle of it like we did last time.
That's funny. Hey, remember a couple episodes ago at the tail end, your microphone got sort of metallic? Well, when it did that, the speaker in my laptop, it must have sent some frequency that rattled something free. And and now every time we're recording, there's like this weird metallic vibrating.
Oh, no.
Oh my gosh. That was a funny day.
Well, yeah. I didn't know I could torture your computer from distance, but you know, it's like spooky action at a distance, but the podcast version.
Good morning, Lori. Hey, before we get into more serious matters, I wanted to tell you about a theology of painting that I've been thinking about.
Like the act of painting?
Yeah. So every February, March, I get cabin fever a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been doing this for probably 25 years. I paint like the walls, normally at my house, but we're not doing it at my house this year because we can't open the windows, and my wife hates the smell of fresh paint. It really irritates her sensitivities. So I decided, and I talked to my trustees, and I decided that the church was looking a little shabby. You know, since COVID, people have changed how often they come to the church building, and people have just sort of gotten out of the habit, and there's just not maybe been a lot of maintenance in the last 5 years. And so the place was just looking a little dinged up and a little shabby. And we decided that we were going to tackle that painting. It happened to coincide. This is where the theology comes in. Several episodes ago, you and I talked, and I ran the idea past you, instead of compassion ministries, to take the M out and to go with co-passion ministries. And to find people who are passionate and to partner with them.
Yeah.
And so as I have taken on that approach and found people of passion and partnered with them, it has set off an interesting domino effect on the first floor of our 3-story building, where we have a growing, I'm going to call it an ecosystem of care developing on the first floor. And so we decided to rearrange a couple of the rooms, because one of the ministries that's actually the most successful is a clothing closet. So we wanted to give them a bigger room. But that room was probably the most beat up and dingy in the whole place. So I started painting in there. And it's interesting because I would pray as I paint for the people that'll eventually be in that room, and the activities in that room, and the people who run that ministry. And it has sort of taken on a life of its own, where, you know, we fixed that up, and then they're going to move in there, which is going to free up a different room. And we have a fridge and a freezer that got donated, and we're going to buy some shelving, and we're applying to be a location where like food banks and the Idaho Extension Society and different groups can drop off produce, milk, yogurt, crates of food for us to give away. So it's just setting off this domino effect. But as I'm in each room, Trip, an interesting thing happens. So like when you are repairing the walls, before you prime and paint, you got to patch up the, especially if a room's been well used, you're patching up the walls and you're washing off the baseboards, and it gets you thinking about like activities that have happened in that room, especially if you're in a historic building like this.
Yeah.
And
like what happened at lock-ins?
Apparently, back in the day, sardines in this building was legendary and could take all night. There are a lot of places to hide.
Oh, you don't have to explain it to me. The church I worked at in Redondo was like the coolest place to play hide and go seek.
Oh, really?
Because that old mansion, that got turned into a church on the cliff. And there, I have a hiding place there that is so obvious, but no one ever found me in it for 8 years. And I had $100 bill. I was like, if anyone finds me, every lock-in, and I'd go there, and no one found me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I would look for hiding spots while I was working and go, when it's dark, where are the places that you can't see? So, sorry, detour on hide and go seek. Which, as a completely other aside, what do you think about at Theology Beer Camp this year, trying to set the world record for the largest game of sardines ever? Whoever is the youngest person at camp, because they'll probably not be able to drink, they go hide in this church, and then the other 600 people go looking for them. The last half it'd be real easy, but then we take a picture and we're like, look, it's the world's largest game of sardines.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know
detouring your story.
I don't know. It's fine. I don't know what the facility looks like that you're going to this year, but had we played it last year in Denver, that facility would have been epic.
There are places we could have hid there that no one would have. Did you know in the basement they have a club at this church? This is how you're like, oh, what's happened here? In that church, in the basement, there is a miniature train club, and we're talking maybe a 20-yard square where there are all these different terrains.
No way.
Whole little city scenes built with figurines and castles, all sorts of crap. And it's intricate. They have a whole team that this is their small group, is they all just get there and work on the trains, and a retired minister like kind of facilitates sharing while they build trains, and they have like middle schoolers to 90-year-olds.
That's pretty cool, man.
And I was like, what is going on down here? Over on one side, it's like furniture, if someone for emergencies, clothing, all this. It's all these things structured either by big events or ways we help people. In the middle of this room is this giant.
No, I wish I had seen that. Back when I was really into Warhammer, I would build, landscapes for battle boards.
You might want to tell people what that is if they don't know.
It's a tabletop war game, and you paint little miniatures, but I would also build the battle scenes, the fields, and sometimes they were mountainous, sometimes there was rivers, sometimes there were cities. But I often found myself going to model train stores because that's where some good supplies are. That is one subculture, man. Like the people who are into that is a definite type of person.
That is simultaneously specific and vague.
So, to wrap up the theology of painting, so what it leads to is an interesting game of Tetris, which is you have to move stuff out of a room, and then you think, well, where do I want to put this? And then you say, well, maybe it should go to that closet. But you want to make sure you don't like offend anybody, or, then you think, does this stuff really need to come back in this room? So you start asking people questions. And what this leads to is sort of like a living narrative or an archive. You are able to access sort of institutional memory in a really interesting way. So when people do drop by the building, they'll say, hey, because they'll see paint on my hands or on my shirt or whatever. They'll say, hey, what are you painting? And I'll be like, actually, this morning I was down in that room downstairs, blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, any chance why that room is full of, let's say 300 hymnals. Because we already have hundreds of hymnals in the sanctuary. Sardines and Warhammer. Why do we have 300 extra hymnals downstairs? Well, it turns out there's an interesting story. In our Magic Valley here, there used to be a lot of Methodist churches, and now there aren't so many. When they closed, their hymnals would often migrate down here because we had extra space for storage. So, Trip, I don't know, like maybe 500, 1,000 extra hymnals on the 3 floors of this building. But it turns out they have migrated down from churches that are no longer open. And you just start learning really interesting things, both about your specific location, but also the surrounding. And like what ministry looked like around here in its heyday was so vastly different. If you have 50 kids in grade school, Sunday school class, that's different than a small group of 5 to 8, right? And it comes with all sorts of interesting furniture choices. But when the ministry through attrition gets smaller and smaller, all those things end up somewhere else. And it's this painting thing has actually helped my pastoring because I get to talk to people and have different conversations because I'm asking them about, hey, any chance you know about this? Or, and they just tell me really interesting stories, but I can see what this place used to be when it was an elephant and now it's a cat. And that's a completely different, Schaller, he had that analogy. And Lyle Schaller back in the day of church growth. Anyway, this painting exercise has been one of the best things I have done for my pastoral heart in a long time. Not only do I pray for the people who are going to be using that room in the future, but I get to learn all sorts of interesting things about how that room was used in the past. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. The I was waiting for you to be like, and we found an urn and no one knows who it is. Or
brother, I have found some really, really wacky stuff. And I do pray whether to put it in, I call it my black magic bag. It's a construction trash bag. Whether I put it in the black magic bag or if I walk it up to the archive on the top floor. And so I have been filling the archive with all sorts of interesting items, some of which I truly don't know what they are. Like odd-shaped gold vessels. I don't know. I mean, liturgically, I'm not sure what they were. But I'm just putting them in the archive, and I'm hoping at some point somebody tells me what they are.
Well, that's fun. Have you ever had the experience of doing that and then realizing something went down that you didn't know about, and now you have to decide as the minister, like, do you want to pursue an explanation or just let it go?
You're not going to believe this. I wasn't even going to tell this story. Trip one.
All right, you tell yours, I'll tell mine, and then we can see which is weirder.
Yours is going to be better. Mine's pretty mild, but still, I think, fascinating. So about 3 weeks ago, we had a memorial here for a woman who had lived a very full and long life. And her celebration of her life was really actually inspiring. People said amazing things about her. Later that week, I found a file unattached to anything else, not labeled. And it turned out, and I kid you not, it was from 14 years ago. It was her resignation letter. No one had mentioned to me that she was the choir director, but that there was a huge fight in the worship wars and about use of the organ and about musical style and about maybe a contemporary service. And I guess the pastor maybe didn't handle it well and was a little heavy-handed. And so she put her foot down and said, "You're not going to boss me around." And she wrote this resignation letter. So it was really weird to read a letter that was written by a person that we just celebrated, right? I mean, that was like 3 days apart. It was really strange. But here's the even weirder part. I recently, the woman who had been here for 14 years, which I didn't even realize was her replacement, her time with us came to an end. And in the debrief of her time coming to an end, a number of problems were articulated. But finding this resignation letter, it turned out these weren't new problems. They had been here for over 20 years, and I didn't know it.
Oh, my.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So it allowed me to go back to people and say, hey, I found this letter. It turns out this is a long-standing problem. And instead of it being like, since I came, these problems have emerged, to say, no, these go back like 4 pastors. And so this is an ongoing problem. And it allowed me to cast a little bit of a vision for what musical worship can look like. Especially now that we've gotten so small. So
the Matt said that someday someone in my home church will find a small bust of Michelangelo's David that has been painted with Alice Cooper face makeup. That's a yeah. All right.
I won't tell the story behind this, but I'll just mention the most interesting thing that I've moved and I've relocated it is we have a 9-foot statue of Jesus, paper mache statue of a very muscular, like odd sized Jesus carrying a cross.
I mean, carrying the sin of the world. I mean, you got to have a little bit of.
And but it dominated our entryway. It just took up so much space. So I moved it upstairs. But the story behind it is so funny. It comes, from an art show, but it was too big when the art show was over to go back into the artist's studio. But no one wanted to see it thrown away. And so I guess somebody here said, we'll take it.
They're like, we heard there's a church that collects leftover stuff. They got 1,000 hymnals. They'll obviously take 9-foot muscular Jesus.
It's unbelievable, dude. It's just the funniest collection of remnants and leftovers and unwanted things. So it's given me a good opportunity to declutter.
Okay. I'm going to grab this thing I found.
Okay. I'm going to read a comment while he's gone. Jasmine, I've been hoping you guys would connect your political discussion to Tillich's The Socialist Decision, i.e., bourgeois religion as maintaining a tenuous connection to the origin. Whoa, that sounds deep.
Yeah, so like in The Socialist Decision, which is one of Tillich's early books.
Okay.
He talks about that there's kind of 2 roots of political thought: the whence, which is the myth of origin, and the whither, which is this catalological question. And he thinks one of the problems of kind of socialism in that context is that the whence is taking priority over the whither. And like the eschatological question, with justice being the superior to mere power of being, right? Like so justice, eschatology, whither, those are all kind of in one category, like the forward orientation to the new, the novel, the breakthrough. Those should take priority versus the whence, the origin, the power of being, that kind of thing. And he thinks that socialist principle of kind of orienting towards the horizon comes from like the historical orientation of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And he goes, this is where a lot of these contradictions in socialism and this movement of revolution take place is the relationship between the is and the ought, where the movement of history and the demand for action, which is central to any historical dialectic. Tillich is like, oh, well, socialist action should stem from an inner conviction, right? This animating energy of the people that corresponds to the meaning or impulse of history. And to understand the meaning and impulse of history, you have to be oriented towards its possibilities and not its past. So this role of expectation, he's like, no, it should be a symbol, like expectation, anticipation, eschatological horizon, all those things should be a symbol of socialism, capable of triumphing over this kind of threat of violence and death associated with the resurgence of some myth of origin, right? And think this is, between the wars in Germany. We know what ends up happening here. And so that, like, when the orienting myth is towards the past, towards origin, towards soil, land, blood, bulk, then you aren't actually embodying the revolutionary principles that should be the socialist principle. And that is, in many parts, he goes, because the religious community actually wants material reality oriented towards itself. So they look to the past, right? God has sovereignly given us X, Y, and Z. Let us claim it. And then the revolutionaries have a diminished view of reality. He's like a kind of orthodox Marxism, where their only explanatory discourse is the superstructure, and like the material reality is dictating what's going on. He goes, so like both of them are missing something, namely that the inheritance of our traditions here are one that, yes, it prizes what we've inherited, but you prize it precisely by orienting towards the new, towards a deeper solidarity, towards the arrival of justice. And then the moment you've responded to justice, it happens again. Like justice is still on the horizon.
Yeah.
It's like, this is our goal. I read it when I was working construction between my freshman and sophomore year in undergrad. So that's what I remember from it. But it was one of those books where after, and I was like, oh,
yeah,
like this is why every real Christian should be a socialist.
And
I was working with workers, so like day laborers, and it also made me get better grades. So
Trip, that was an excellent summary. If I were ever on a game show, you would definitely be on my phone a friend list.
If the question on the game show was about a Tillich book.
Yes.
Yeah. But it is I actually really like the book. I could look at it if we want to talk about it more.
Well, first of all, I want to see what's this object you went and retrieved.
Look at this. This, Bo, is the Religious Beliefs Inventory Kit.
Oh.
An inventory to help people understand, evaluate, and develop their religious beliefs and values, compiled by Reverend Dr. James R. Hinn, Director of Counseling and Family Life Education at Trinity Presbyterian in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay. But you didn't find this in Arizona.
No, I found it at a church in Southern California.
Okay.
And so, Bo, this is so cool because you have these 65 questions, and after you go through these 65 questions, you can discover if you're a Christian or not, or if you're a heretic, or like, what your growing edges are, perhaps.
Really?
Yeah, a religious beliefs inventory kit.
Okay.
And the explanations of this kit are as enjoyable as anything. You can also send it to him to get it, officially evaluated.
Wow.
Let me just show you an example here.
Okay.
Because, there are these different topics, Bo. Topics that you got to get.
Now, I admit you seem excited about this, but on the surface, it doesn't seem that exciting. Well,
how you chart your answers here.
Yeah.
You kind of go through it and you're like, oh, well, what's he think about all these different topics? And then you get done and you score it.
Score?
Yeah. You're like, how many did you answer this, and this for? And then you could discover, like, what are the areas of beliefs that you need to work on, And surprisingly, they got nice little 1 sentence explanations of the correct answers for all these questions.
Oh my.
Yeah. Like, so how about we'll demonstrate this by you giving pick a number between 1 and 65.
Oh boy. 37.
Okay, 37. Like, and this is an ecclesiology question, which, remember, the Presbyterian made this.
Okay.
The church is unnecessary and other institutions can replace it and are doing so. Your 4 options here are: A, the church is the body of Christ called together by God, and without it, there is no hope for the world. B, the church is a gathering of the community of followers of Christ and performs a unique function for the world. C, the church is a gathering of people who want to achieve some good in the world. D, the church has no relevance to man or his world today.
Well, first of all, I didn't know it was going to be multiple choice. That makes it even better. Wow. I'm okay. I guess I would be closest to B.
Okay, that is you just have a little growing edge.
Okay.
You haven't like internalized the 7 mountain mandate that the church actually is called to be in charge of everything. But
wow, that's intense, man.
Yeah, but they have ones on like tithing, science questions, some stuff where you're just like, unless you had a reason, like, why would you have an opinion about this? Like, oh, the development of the creeds. Like, could you imagine some random person at your church who it was just like, the 7 ecumenical creeds are play what role in the church's life, and you're from like basically one step short of an inerrant word of God to they play no role and have distracted it made the church believe things that are all lies, and it's anyway, the ones on sex are also interesting. There's one.
You have to believe something about sex?
Well, it's just like what the correct answers are for some of these. Yeah, Bo. I just think we should probably just go through this at some point. Let's play the game.
I believe I'd like to have sex.
I support it. I think it's great.
I believe sex happens.
It's more fun when it's reciprocally pleasurable. Like, yeah, it's it does condemn racism. I will say that. Like, I was worried when I got to the question about essentializing races, and it's like, nope, God made everyone in God's image. You shouldn't be a racist. That doesn't mean, you're probably good to know, that particular cultures may have tendencies that don't cohere to biblical values. I was like, so you're not racist, you're just cultural.
I see. You know what's funny? Oh, Lori wants you to read one.
Hold on, let me look at the numbers to see where the sex one is, because I just have to say, like, it's not every day you're at like a church yard sale and find something that's with quality material like this.
Oh, speaking of yard sales, while you're looking that up, one of the rooms I had to declutter was apparently we used to have an annual rummage sale. And so people would just bring their unwanted stuff and put it in this giant closet. It's almost the size of a room. And then once a year, I guess we would pull it out and put it out somewhere and have a rummage sale. But whatever was the final year of having the rummage sale, no one said, we're not doing this anymore. And so stuff just kept collecting and collecting, but there was never a sale again. So it was all just stored back there. So we actually gave it consignment to a vintage shop and said we would split the money and that our portion would just go to a feeding program.
Okay, but here's some of the science ones. These are just quality.
All right.
One must believe all the miracles of the Bible to be a good Christian.
You must believe?
Yeah. all the miracles of the Bible. Just like everything in this question doesn't make sense for most of church history. This is why it's great. Like one must believe here. Belief is obviously like assenting to historical enactment of something. So that's not even a biblical notion of belief. All the miracles, the category of miracle and the way it is used is like definitely a Humean. So no one in the Bible knows what the hell this means. Of the Bible, right? Like, okay, so who the canonization somehow made these miraculous under Hume terms things have to be assented to in a very post-Protestant notion of belief in the Enlightenment in order to be a good Christian. Could you imagine if something like, okay, one, let's just posit that being good was not a category that Jesus applied to himself, let alone his disciples. So like being a good Christian, whatever that means, is already moralized, a religion that problematizes moralizing. But like, why do you call me good? No one but the Father's good. But to be a good Christian now is somehow associated with an epistemology that's thoroughly modern. Is that one of the four answers on the back bow? No. It didn't. Like, I believe Jesus turned water into wine, walked on water, and raised men from the dead.
That's one of the answers?
Yeah. It was just like, just in case we weren't clear enough.
Wow.
And let's go here. We got raised men from the dead. So Lazarus walked on water and turned water to wine. You know, you're like, where are you getting these three? Like, how is Lazarus associated with the water to wine bit? The biblical miracles do not conflict with the findings of modern science. So you might be saying here they don't. Well, see, funny thing is, they do, and you need to pick Jesus. There is no conflict between science and religion. Oddly enough, none of these answers match the typology of science and religion relations that I've taught in the intro to science. Like, you don't get non-overlapping magisteria. You basically only get 4 variations of the conflict narrative. Really sad. Really sad.
What about secondary causation?
Yeah, that is not in the not in there. I believe in attending church at least 3 Sundays out of 4. That's a question.
3 out of 4.
Yeah, that's a quality batting average. And I've always told people, you don't have to be here every week. You just have to give every week.
Nice. The miracle that I would most like to examine is the walls of Jericho. Because I learned in seminary.
Oh, Jasmine's right. Those were all 3 Johannine signs.
Oh, that. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
They were checking to see if you'd read Bultmann's commentary. They were like, whoa. If you read Bultmann's commentary and understood that he was picking up an apologetic document that used the miracles to legitimate the identification of Jesus as the Christ, and then he's problematizing it. John's like, no, you know how many people do miracles around this place? We haven't even demythologized yet. That's not a big deal. They were pointing to the new reality that's arrived in Christ. So they should not compel belief. They reveal the form of life, of eternal life. And then, hence Bultmann's commentary on John, which is still a banger. What a banger. If you're going to read a commentary on John, like Bultmann's Money in the Bank. Right. So, turn water to wine. He's like, this is, Jesus just cleanses the temple at the beginning. So he's like, this isn't a historical telling. This is what the Logos looks like in flesh in a theological narrative. And so he goes, so what happens when the Logos in flesh shows up? You have a wedding where the wine doesn't run out. He's like, this is the advent of new creation. And Mary's like, come on, son, show him who you are. Yeah. Why does she want him to show it to there? Is it because she's being difficult and mean to him? Or no. She knows who he is. And she asks him to reveal it at the opportune time, namely the wedding banquet where the wine doesn't run out. And he's like, why would you need what part of this is believing it literally to go the incarnation of the Logos, God giving God's self, coming to participate in reality, and we get to participate in the divine life? If you thought, you know what, I believe that. That's why I know at one point in time, some water got turned into wine. Bultmann's like, this is dumb. He's saying John, the Johannine guy, read some like apologetic track that included these miracles in it and said, this is why you have to believe in Jesus. And John's like, that's not what faith is. Faith is trusting that new creation's broken through. Faith is trusting that it's not about the resuscitation of John, of a corpse. It's about the coming of new creation, right? And so he plays with the resurrection of Lazarus. Anyway.
Well, I will check out the Boltman commentary
because
on Wednesday nights, our Bible study, we're going to move into the Gospel of John starting in 2 weeks.
Oh, because you aren't doing Daniel for your Bible study. You're doing the sermons.
Right. And we just wrapped up the book of Jonah. Now, an interesting thing happened on Wednesday night. So we read the 4th chapter of Jonah, and then we had a little extra time. So we went to the New Testament. I always like to do this on the final week of a book study and say, does the New Testament reference the book of Jonah at all?
Yeah.
So it turns out in our Gospels, Jesus says, no sign will be given this wicked generation except the sign of Jonah. Right? Now, here's where it gets interesting. That is both in Matthew and Mark in a short way, and then in an expanded way in Luke. But it does not appear in John.
Right.
And I have a theory, and I'll have to read the book of John again with this question in my mind, but I have a theory that it's because there are so many extra miracles in John that are signs that John didn't need the sign of Jonah, that the other synoptics did, because it wasn't the only sign by that time. So anyway, I just think that that's a weird.
Aren't there 7? I think there's 7 big ones in John.
Yeah. No, you're thinking of the I am statements.
Oh, okay. There's wine, feeding, Lazarus, man born blind. Oh. It's each one is like a whole vignette in John. You like the signs are whole vignettes as opposed to like in the synoptics where it's just like Jesus came into town, he was tossing out demons, healing some peeps. Like you get setting up for the Zacchaeus story. He's like, I just healed a blind guy while I was walking in. He's just like, cacao, dropping that junk all over the place in the synoptics. And John, they're like, oh, we're going to tell a miracle story. It's going to be a big deal. He heard Lazarus died. Jesus wept. Best one if you need to memorize a Bible verse quickly.
Yeah, John definitely organized the narrative around these.
Yeah, that's what Boltman said. But
well, I'm going to read the Boltman commentary in my prep.
You should.
I never.
I haven't read it. I'm thinking of my memory of reading it, going because I read it in undergrad, and I was a Baptist preacher's kid, so like Boltman was one of those boogeymen. You're like, oh, he's demythologizing the Bible, blah 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 blah. And then I'm reading it, and I'm like, I think we might have not understood what the guy's up to. Like, like normally, I don't just see like quality scholarship and sermons in a commentary. Sometimes you're sitting there going like, so what exactly am I doing with this? And he's like getting at what John's agenda and interest was in the way he sees the Christ event. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. Like now I like John, and I feel bad. I was probably spitting bad game at Boltman, but I didn't have a podcast yet. So I already liked him by the time I had a podcast.
That happened to me the first time that I read Marcus Borg, because of the Jesus seminar. I was told he was not just a heretic, but like the devil,
Watch
and
out.
So I read a Marcus Borg book that I was living in Olympia, Washington at the time, and they had an amazing used bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the bookstore, and I just thought, well, I'm going to read this just to see how bad it is. And I'm reading it, and I have the strangest epiphany that this guy not only believes this stuff, I think he both knows more and believes deeper than I do.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know that I've been given the right impression of Marcus Borg.
He was he had a very deep faith and was a very warm person.
Right.
That if you meet him and only had heard slander, first you're going to notice that the guy's wearing like red socks with Birkenstocks, and you're like, I bet this guy really was sad that he's like he's too old to be a hippie all the time. But you notice that, and then you're like waiting for him to do something, really heretical, or whatever. And he gives a talk, and people, I've seen him give talks in the South a bunch, and it's making sense. Like you get what his logic is. So you don't think, oh, he's being deceptive.
Yeah.
Then Q&A starts.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, I was sitting there. This was in Charlotte, and he had just given a public talk. It's the first time I saw him talking.
You raised your hand.
No. I mean, I did, but I was not like half the audience, like ready to light him up. He gave the talk. This was, I think, meeting Jesus again for the first time period.
Yeah.
I think it was recently after 9/11.
I think that's the book I read.
And so, this is tangential to a talk on how we would understand Jesus in the historical context, and how understand the kingdom of God and the power of Rome, and, things that even N.T. Wright agrees with basically everything that was said in his talk, So it wasn't like his talk was something like you should also be a liberal Episcopalian. It was, Jesus isn't a upper middle class white Republican American, so we probably should think about this. And I'm like, yeah, everything he said, he and N.T. Wright agreed on. So it's like not even controversial for his material.
Yeah.
First question. Dr. Borg, are you telling me that Jesus would want me to love Osama bin Laden? And
oh boy.
And Marcus is like, he doesn't go to answering the question directly. He's genius. This is why I go, he has to be a real Christian, because I know what I would do when I've gotten these questions, and the person will likely feel humiliated. If Tripp isn't thinking, he's like, thanks for setting this one on the tee, son. Game on. I got the mic. That's what would have happened. I hopefully will evolve and become more spiritually mature. But he goes, I think I understand where this question's coming from, because I find Jesus utterly offensive sometimes. Like his trust in Abba was so big that he didn't think the weapons of Rome were the weapons of God's kingdom, that he didn't think he would solve the world's problems by bowing to Satan and becoming the new emperor, that he didn't even want Peter to try to protect him when he was getting arrested, and even healed the guy coming to arrest him. And you do all that, and we know the history of the church, and yet they preserved him saying, pray for your enemies, turn the other cheek, conquer people with good, heap love on them. And that, and he just starts going through this, and he goes, and I just know I can't be a good disciple of Jesus, because you're right. I have friends that lost people on 9/11, and I don't think I can imagine a world where me and Osama bin Laden stand before a loving God and it works out. It's just, I found myself caught up in the story of God, and I do know historically, and you can do your own theology just like I have to, but I do know historically that Jesus could imagine me and Osama bin Laden and him and his enemies before a loving God.
Wow.
And that was the invitation he gave, and it makes me so uncomfortable. And I think as Christians, our world is a bit different, but also that dynamic's there. And so what does faithfulness look like? I was sitting there going like, wow, what the hell? Homeboy just like, he took that question, he resonated with his thing, he puts it back in, and he's like, yeah, we are both I'm joining you in being offended by Jesus. And I just want you to know that historically that's the case. He's like, but Jesus' dream is one where we can all stand before the presence of the beloved God. I'm like, oh, Jim, come on.
You know, even when we had Marcus in Phoenix for and
Big Tent Christianity in Phoenix, it
Big
was an
Tent,
event.
Yeah. And he did the big presentation in the big room. He did pretty good. I think people were waiting for him to be more controversial than he was. But it was in that breakout session where we paired him with Rachel Held Evans that they were talking specifically about science, and he still wasn't as controversial as I had expected, and not nearly as offensive or dismissive, but he did, make a really strong case. And then I'll always remember, and you've referenced it recently, her hilarious retort was, well, I don't know about that, Dr. Borg. I don't think that most people who sit in the pews in, my town in Tennessee would agree with you, or something like that. And it was just like they were just coming from such different worlds that they almost.
Yeah.
So Michael wants to know, wasn't N.T. Wright friends with Borg? I don't know about that, but I did see him on the same stage in San
they
Francisco.
wrote a book together. They were PhD students together in Cambridge.
Wow.
So they've been friends since, their 20s.
Trip, I was just going to humble brag that I've seen him on the same stage at AAR. Yeah, sorry, you stepped on my toes a little bit there.
Sorry. Bo's seen them both on the same stage at AAR. Dude, when we did the live podcast, on that roof in Malibu where we did a few podcasts.
Yeah.
The one with N.T. Wright on there.
Yeah.
So it's the only one that got filmed, which is just entertaining. Not that I like rewatch it, but the funniest thing is every time YouTube puts it up, you see this picture, and he just left an academic conference.
Yeah.
And everyone else, like half the people there are the normal Homebrewed Live podcast people, and the other half were at this conference. But no one was dressed up except N.T. Wright. And he comes in, looking like an Oxford Don with his 3-piece suit on. And so like the picture has like, oh, well, here's Greg Boyd in like a hoodie. And then there's N.T. Wright all dolled up, like fancy looking. And then there's me with like a pirate shade Jesus t-shirt and the whatever the regular thing it picks for like the icon, I'm like mid just chug, and we're sitting there in this thing. Richard Beck was on that episode too. Okay. Anyway, we're having this thing go on. Greg Boyd, like Minnesota open theist, against Christian nationalism.
Yeah, he is.
And Richard Beck had just written his book on the old Scratch, which was this book on the devil, and he's psychology. Okay. And they were talking about demons and possession or whatever. And N.T. Wright leans over to me and goes, What am I supposed to do with this? And I go, I don't know, dude. This is, do you need a refill? And he's like, yeah. And so I like look at one of the people, and they walk back over and hand N.T. Wright another drink, and he just starts laughing and looks over. He goes, how do you get one of those friends? And they're still talking about demons, right? So then someone, I can't remember who, was like, oh, N.T. Wright, well, what do you think about this? And he's like, well, it's very complicated. He gives this like, I'm trying to be open. There's a phenomena, how you'll describe it. I don't want to be dismissive, but like, there is this sense of the demonic, like what, but do we want to like, are they transpersonal image? Like he's trying to give this complicated answer, right? And Greg Boyd's just like, oh no, I've met one. And Greg Boyd proceeds to tell a story about like encountering a demon.
Yeah.
And I've never seen N.T. Wright's face more awkward, because Greg Boyd is straight up like talking about this girl that was possessed and trying to like cut her throat off, or like, it's a horribly traumatic story. And this is like why he believes in demons, and he's telling the story. And I was like, well, it's hard to argue with a personal anecdote. But so then I just turned to N.T. Wright, and I'm like, Tom, some atheist political philosophers are really interested in Paul, and they pick up a weird thing around the way he understands spiritual warfare. You got thoughts on that?
Oh my.
It was one of the funniest things I've ever been present for. And I'm trying not to look like, what did I just let happen? And you know who comes to those live podcasts? This is not an audience full of people that were like, I need a nuanced view on there being demons, let alone someone be like, no, I met one. And so I'm like, oh man, this is not the audience for a demon tried to cut some throat off.
Wow. Like, anyway. Or the setting.
Yeah, because we're just sitting there on a, there's this beautiful Malibu sunset in the background. But he did a voice and everything, I think. Who knows? My memory of this, now that it's on the internet, we could find out how accurate. But like, he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, you have a demon voice.
Wow. The year that I moved from LA up to Portland, one of my stops was in Auburn, California, outside Sacramento. And N.T. Wright was speaking at William Jessup University, and my friend Cynthia Schaefer Elliott was like the coordinator of that event. She's at Baylor now, by the way, and she's a part of the Bible for Normal People crew. But she was organizing that event, and she got me 5 minutes alone with N.T. Wright, and I took my little voice recorder, and I haven't listened to that in years, but I'm going to go try and find it. And if I find it, I'll send it to you, because I asked him about homebrew.
Oh.
And not the podcast, Homebrew Christianity.
Actually homebrewing.
But about homebrewing. And we had a nice little conversation, but I'll try and find it and send it to you.
Yeah. Oh, Bo, this is the longest podcast intro we've done yet.
Yeah. Yeah, this is all still banter.
Well, I don't know. We can always just do what we were going to do next week.
Well, you did make it the title of the. Oh, you're right. We are 53 minutes.
That's what I just noticed.
This is a Ramblecast.
I can just change the name of it. I want everyone to know I did prepare by actually writing out what we were going to talk about.
No, you have detailed notes you want to go through about MAGA and civil religion.
Yeah, and what do you think?
Did you say let me think?
No, I said what do you think?
What do I think? Yeah, you know what? So my only hesitation with putting it off a week is I'm worried that it's not going to be as relevant next week.
Oh, because it'll be over.
Right, that the MAGA
movement's going to resolve.
Yeah, that it won't be as hot of a topic in the news.
Okay. I am just thrilled that you think it might be a less of a topic in the news, Bo.
I mean, I'm sort of taking
your optimism is just outstanding.
I'm sort of taking a this too shall pass.
Okay, well, what if we do it and we'll go through the sections, but you do like one big thought per section. And unless you ask me a question, I won't say anything till we get done.
Okay, so you want to press on because it's what the thing is titled.
Well, you encouraged me.
I did, yeah.
So I'll do the section and then you can say something after it. But unless you ask me a question,
okay,
I don't get to say anything else till I go to the next section.
Oh, okay. This is an interesting format. So I will my friend Dave says from your mouth. Side note, I just want to tell you that I've been asked by 2 people in my congregation this week if I voted for Trump. And I find this fascinating. I'm not saying it's going to go away, Matt, that MAGA is going away. I'm saying that it won't be as hot of a topic in the news.
Yeah. Amen.
But to be asked if you voted for Trump is a very interesting thing because
you said I'm a Christian and an American, so no.
Well, what I said was, because I'm preaching through the book of Daniel, and what I said is, I'm curious what would have made you think that was a possibility. And it is fascinating that, Trip, when you don't use MSNBC talking points, people often can't recognize what they're hearing. If it doesn't come in a pre-digestible little packet, then sometimes they don't hear the nuance or the bigger idea embedded in what you're trying to say. They're only trying to categorize you. It's been a fascinating development.
Oh man, I would be worried at what I would do in the pulpit the next time if two people asked me that. Just be like, I want to provide some clarifying questions. Like, I want to give some clarity. This to Trip. But I made enough jokes that make people awkward.
Yeah, you do.
That Anyway, I don't want to detour. I almost started to tell a story, Bo.
Okay.
All right. So here's the idea.
Here we go.
I recently, like last week, read Tara Isabella Burton's like 2 books on public religion, and then it connected with some of the Byung-Chul Han stuff I've been reading and thinking about. And so I wrote this little thing because I found, like, I've been trying to, when stuff happens that people are genuinely interested in, that different theorists and stuff I like reading help frame it different. Then I'm like, oh, I'll write something about this, because then you're introducing the theory stuff, but with popular context. Like, what is religious studies or philosophy or science stuff? How could it help frame? So that was the idea of this. And so I titled it Manifesting America, Maga and the New Civil Religion. And I'll read the first bit. Well, I'll read the intro in the first section. Something extraordinary is happening in American spiritual life. As traditional religious institutions decline, new forms of meaning-making have emerged, creating what scholars call a new civil religion. This contemporary spiritual landscape is characterized by its provision of meaning, purpose, community, and ritual outside traditional religious frameworks. Within this context, Donald Trump and the Maga movement represent a unique manifestation of this new civil religion, blending elements of self-making, positive thinking, and reactionary atavism into a potential spiritual and political force. All right, now, the first section is titled The Historical Roots of Self-Creation. This is Tripp's attempt to summarize the genealogy of manifesting in Tara Isabella Burton's book. So you see,
Genealogy of manifesting.
Yeah, the spiritual concept of manifesting, which she points out is way beyond people that use it directly. Like, even the spiritual religious language of large numbers of practicing Christians act as if the implied metaphysic of their religious language is one where there's some inner energy that does things on stuff. Okay,
for sure.
And that's a thoroughly modern post-capitalism notion of the self. It's like, even when you're picking up old traditions, you imagine a world differently than they did, and then you get like energy manifesting the secret. Anyway, all right. So here's my attempt to summarize a genealogy in a way that's not obtuse.
Okay.
Maybe. All right. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to trace the genealogy of self-creation in Western culture. This history begins crucially with Martin Luther's radical reconception of religious authority. By establishing an inner-outer distinction within the self and emphasizing personal experience in matters of faith, Luther inadvertently set the stage for the individual's internal authority to become paramount in matters of meaning and truth. His insistence that no external body should mediate between the individual and sacred text would eventually evolve far beyond what he could have imagined. From this foundation, as Tara Isabella Burton demonstrates, the theology of self-creation developed through 4 crucial stages. The first emerged in European Renaissance, where figures like Albert Dürer began presenting themselves in ways previously reserved for religious figures. The self-maker appeared as a kind of demigod, a special chosen being by God or nature to participate in the divine right of creation. This wasn't democratic. Not everyone was seen as possessing this ability, but it established a revolutionary precedent. The Enlightenment transformed this exclusive divine right into a broader philosophical revolution. Thinkers began to recognize that customs around food, clothing, and sexuality weren't divinely ordained, but human constructions. The disenchantment of custom, the second stage, made everything open to interpretation based on individual reason. Authority and social custom came to be seen not as sacred guides, but as obstacles to authentic selfhood. In the 19th century, witnessed what Burton calls the re-enchantment of desire, this third stage, which took two distinct forms. In Europe, an aristocratic model emerged through figures like Beau Brummel, who turned self-presentation into an art form and even a kind of magic. Dandies were seen as miniature gods, with some occultists developing systems for turning self-presentation into literal magical practice. In America, a more democratic model emphasized self-made success through determination, exemplified in figures like Frederick Douglass. These threads ultimately resolved in the cultural figure of the Hollywood star, a being whose power to create and project a self raised complex questions about authenticity and performance. Meanwhile, the rise of consumer capitalism and Gilded Age wealth created new possibilities for purchasing identity and meaning. This merged with new thought's emphasis on positive thinking as a path to health and wealth, teaching that people can manifest their divine potential through creative visualization. Failure, whether physical illness or financial ruin, was recast as a failure of self-confidence, a mind that hadn't properly manifested its potential. This history is only accelerated in our own time. Postmodernity's critique of normative reason made space for new forms of spiritual authority. The internet has enabled individuals to connect with others who share their beliefs, further incentivizing spiritual individualism. Consumer culture offers endless opportunities to purchase meaning, purpose, community, and ritual. What began with Luther's emphasis on individual religious experience has evolved into a spiritual landscape where the self is the highest authority and personal desire has become a sacred force.
Wow. That is so interesting. It ties together a whole bunch of stuff I'm super interested in, but that I haven't ever seen woven together, So a couple things stand out to me that I'm super intrigued by. I tend to give credibility when people start with talking about how radical, say, Luther and the Protestant Reformation was in the transformation of our conception of self and authority. And obviously, a lot of people point to figures like Descartes, right, and the Enlightenment. But to go further back into the Protestant Reformation, I always give credibility when people are able to start there and tie it in. So that was number one. I was prone to like what you were going to say because that's where it started. Second thing, I'm intrigued by, and I missed one word, the something of custom, the D.
Oh yeah, it's the disenchantment of custom.
Disenchantment.
So think custom, traditions, religions. Yeah. The moment the self, right, Luther starts, this inner-outer distinction. Once only the inner can authoritize a belief or a truth or whatever, you get the inner-outer distinction. Then science demythologizes traditions, histories, customs, reveals that, these are constructs by humans. Then none of that shared social space or the cultural web is the inheritance, that it doesn't inherently contain meaning. So then all of it becomes disenchanted. What do you do? Because now the only authoritative feature is you, and now you're tasked to figure this whole thing out.
Right. So by demythologizing or deconstructing or getting rid, right, of that externality, a vacuum is created, and into that vacuum comes a prioritizing, a reifying of self, right? That is a fascinating twist. And then when you bring it into the technological age and the empowerment that comes through being able to Google anything and be, nearly omniscient and trans physical and so many other things. This, I would call it like a new age impulse, or it fills that vacuum, and it manifests in this prioritizing of self, and especially a powerful, even re-enchanted, right? An enchanted self that's able to tap into these mystical powers.
Yeah, it's custom gets de-enchanted, and the language was that desire gets re-enchanted, right? Because for most wisdom traditions, desire is the root of the problem. Now it's the only true authority for the self is one's desire, and then desire gets metaphysical legitimacy, right, in manifesting.
Yeah.
Oh, so now be it positive thinking, new thought, manifesting, all this kind, and but that language shows up, even within religious traditions who have Augustine and Luther in it, who think the worst thing you could do as a human being is give divine authority to the individual's desire.
Yeah.
It tends not to be what original sin legitimates. But also, just to say, like, it's not just that. That's also a place that Freud and Jung would agree that this is a bad idea. Let's not sacralize desire.
Yeah.
This would be a place Plato and Aristotle are like, not a good idea. But when you still have the existential crisis of meaning, purpose, value, and you've disenchanted in a shared social referent, then what's left is a self. And anyway, okay, I'm going to read the next section because I'm already breaking my own rules. Okay. The theology of self-making, Trump as archetype. This history helps us understand our present moment, where surveys indicate that half of Americans believe in manifesting, the idea that thoughts can directly shape reality. It also helps us understand Donald Trump's personal or public persona. Trump represents the apotheosis of American self-creation, a man who thought through sheer force of will and relentless self-promotion transformed himself into a living brand. From his early real estate days through The Apprentice and into politics, Trump demonstrated an almost mystical belief in the power of a self-assertion. In Trump's world, things that weren't true, especially about yourself, could be true if you said them loud enough and with enough conviction. This isn't just showmanship, it's theology. Trump's worldview is profoundly shaped by Norman Vincent Peale and the power of positive thinking movement. This wasn't just about optimism. It was about the belief that that human thoughts and desires could literally reshape reality. Yet, as philosopher Byung-Chul Han warns us, this obsession with positive thinking and self-optimization comes at a devastating cost. The constant pressure to perform, to project success and strength, creates what Han calls a performance society, where freedom becomes indistinguishable from coercion. In our post-Christian world, the desire to be a god is a distinctly modern tendency. When traditional religious frameworks fade, what remains is the shape of our desires, the belief that we truly, really, authentically are whoever we want to be. This is the closest thing that many now have to a divine force, a sacred force, a magical force. From an evolutionary perspective, our susceptibility to such beliefs isn't accidental. Natural selection was organized our minds so that we do not see reality clearly, but instead serve our genetic self-interest through various forms of self-deception. The power of positive thinking taps into this evolved tendency, promising that we can bend reality to our will through the force of belief alone. Trump tapped into something deeper and more primal than the American cultural consciousness, something that felt truer than ever in our era of carefully curated Instagram feeds and personal brands, but also something that speaks to our collective exhaustion.
Woo, dog. That was something. 2 quick comments. Norman Vincent Peale was the minister that officiated Trump's first wedding to Ivana.
Yeah.
So that's not that reference that you put in there. That's not a random, trivial thing. Second thing is, when I was moderating the Future of Liberation Theologies at last year's beer camp, Adam Clark brought up this point that you're making about how people idolize people like Trump for this very purpose. And so we have to be careful about saying that, especially with this new generation, unlike the civil rights leaders of the 60s and 70s who were deeply embedded in a religious spiritual tradition of the prophetic, that many of the new generation idolize the self-made success of these billionaires and media figures. So those are just two tie-ins that I thought of while you were reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. The next section is called the commodification of community in digital space. The movement's power partly stems from its ability to create strong community bonds through opposition. MAGA followers aren't just united by what they believe in, but by who they stand against: the elites, the deep state, the radical left. This opposition creates a powerful sense of shared identity and purpose. However, as Hahn astutely observes, what appears as a community might actually represent its erosion, as individuals relate to each other primarily as competitors in an endless performance of success and grievance. Hahn's insight cuts even deeper, and this is a quote: "The origin of culture lies in community. Culture teaches symbolic values that found a community. The more culture becomes a commodity, the more it leaves behind its origin behind. The total commercialization and commodification of culture leads to the destruction of community." End quote. This is precisely what we see in MAGA, a movement that transforms community into a branded commodity, complete with merchandise, rallies that feel like rock concerts, and social media performance. The community that is so frequently invoked on digital platforms, Hans warns, is a commodified form of community. Community as commodity spells the end of community itself. The movement's heavy reliance on social media amplifies this dynamic, creating echo chambers that reinforce their biases and hinder genuine dialogue.
Two quick comments. One of my favorite books is Consuming Religion. If people want to investigate this line of reasoning, it's a really great place to start. Second thing, you may know I'm a dual citizen with Canada, and every morning I listen to the Canadian news.
Both. You have to boo both national anthems.
That was funny, man. Every morning I listen to the Canadian news while I'm waiting for my French press to stew and steep. And I have been amazed at the power of an enemy to unify a group of people who are so. Canada, up until a month ago, was getting ready for their own election cycle and are as divided and uncooperative as they've ever been. Then Trump announces the tariffs, and all of a sudden Canadians are unified in such a powerful way. And it's amazing how having a common enemy can bring unity to a very diverse and uncooperative group of people.
Yeah, that's funny.
Nothing will solidify allegiance like a shared enemy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, poor Canadians. At least y'all won the hockey game. As if Canada became the 51st state, would you be double American? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, man.
I got double American citizenship.
I would be red, white, and blue, red and white.
Yeah. You'd have to put that blue in the cream of your patriotic Oreo.
Hey, these colors don't run.
All right. Speaking of nostalgia, the next section is called Atavism and the Politics of Nostalgia. Yet MAGA isn't just about self-creation and positive thinking. It contains a strong atavistic element, a yearning for a mythological past and a rejection of progressive social change. Yeah, see, this is a little connection to that Tillich aside earlier. As Burton observes, quote, Trump's vision of making America great again is explicitly atavistic. His perceived virility is inseparable from his vision of the imagined pre-political correctness America in which men like him more easily thrived. This combination of forward-looking self-creation and backward-looking nostalgia might seem contradictory, but it captures something essential about our moment. We want to be absolutely free to create ourselves, yet we also long for the certainties of an imagined past. The movement's relationship with truth reveals another layer of complexity, as Burton notes. To some, Trump's election confirmed that nothing really matters. This callous disregard for the truth is the ultimate form of disengaged machismo. This nihilistic stance, where truth becomes merely a function of power and desire, emerges naturally from the collapse of traditional frameworks of meaning. When the self becomes the highest authority, truth becomes whatever serves the self's desires.
Oh, Lord, help us. All right, two things. I am fascinated with nostalgia and the misremembered past. One of the best introductory books I've ever found is called Remembering the Way We Never Were.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the appeal of nostalgia, but it introduced me to the phrase cult of domesticity, of which J.D. Vance is now the living icon, right, of this way of thinking. And so anyway, if people want to check that out, you know what I'm going to have to do, Trip? I'm going to make a Substack post of all the books that your post made me think of. But the other thing is, in a post-truth world, right, in 2016, we were introduced to alternative facts and truthiness, you know, Colbert's thing.
Mm-hmm.
And but in a post-truth world, that thing you said is so terrifying. There really is no truth except that which serves my goal.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And that's why I've found that Maga, in a sense, is taking that logic of manifesting and then going like, well, here's our new civil religion. We're going to manifest one. And so it takes those two elements that are of the positive side of manifesting, like the self-creation, this kind of thing, and then it connects it to this like deeply resentful nostalgia.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, why would we want democracy? We'll just executive order it. Why would we, we'll act like we have a mandate. We'll do this or that, like underneath it, we think, oh, this is not how democracy works. And he's like, no, I'm doing what I've done my whole life. Yeah. I manifest this junk. Like I'm not in jail. I got the richest person in the world running my stuff. Like, what do you think? Like, you're going to tell me I should trust a system that sucks and is so weak you can't even put me in jail for blatantly breaking the law repeatedly? You have to get off the record comments from anyone in my party at this point to suggest that I'm not crazy. Like, have you seen what I've done? Like, I straight up called Zelensky a dictator, and they're trying to figure out how they can tell me no. You see, like the thing you get it that's fascinating to me is like that he understood like the new spiritual formation of America, right? And is performing it so intensely that all these cultural resentments and things that he's now generating a people, he's manifesting a people to legitimate his own thing.
Yeah.
And it's become a new kind of civil religion because it is impervious to to reality.
So this makes me think of my least favorite and my most favorite famous lines. Least favorite. It's not a lie if you believe it. Now my favorite. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Usually attributed to Kurt Cobain, but we think he got it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can think of some other Kurt Cobain lines that are pretty cool. All right, so the next section is called Truth, Power, and Tribal Consciousness. These contradictions extend into the movement's relationship with truth and power. While celebrating individual self-making, MAGA demonstrates strong authoritarian tendencies. While preaching personal responsibility, it often operates through conspiracy theories that deny objective reality. Hahn would recognize in this the loss of what he calls negativity, the capacity for contemplation and deep thought that enables genuine understanding. The movement's rejection of intellectualism and nuanced perspective reflects this loss, perpetuating simplistic narratives that resist critical reflection. In a world where nothing really matters, where truth is whatever serves the self desires, the only remaining authority is the will to power. These aren't bugs in the system. They're features of a spiritual movement that has made individual desire its highest authority. The MAGA movement transformed these individual spiritual impulses into a collective experience. It performed clear narrative of it provided a clear narrative of national decline and restoration. With Trump promoting himself as the only person capable of delivering America and making the country great again. From an evolutionary perspective, this activates ancient tribal mechanisms that evolved to help our ancestors form tight, knit groups in times of perceived threat. These psychological modules, which once helped bands of hunter-gatherers survive, now fuel political polarization and generate a tribal consciousness, the tendency to see our group as inherently virtuous and opposing groups as fundamentally evil. Maga rallies became a form of religious ritual, creating moments of collective effervescence where individual desires for transformation could be expressed through communal experience.
So this is where the civil religion element starts to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I was waiting.
There's like two elements of it. One is like, this is the shift that's happened in Western notions of spirituality, their self-creation. And then here are these dynamics that are going through, right? Like nostalgia for a past that never was, resentment, tribalism, and stuff. So then how does manifesting in the Trump MAGA form generate a collective that reorients the populace in the way we expect to relate?
Well, this is both deep and troubling stuff.
It creeps me out.
How much? Just out of curiosity, how much more?
What?
How much to read? Just out of curiosity.
The last section.
Great.
Okay. All right. The last section is called Beyond the Politics of Self-Creation. Understanding MAGA through the lens of religious studies and cultural analysis helps us grasp both its appeal and its dangers. It's not enough to dismiss it as mere politics or simple demagoguery. What we're witnessing might be understood as a form of modern dandyism, the desire to be seen as special without traditional moorings of birth or blood, but occurring in a society, as Hahn notes, that has lost its ability to determine a coherent moral framework. We're witnessing the emergence of a new form of spiritual political fusion, one that will likely influence American society long after Trump himself has left the stage. As we move forward, we need to better understand how spiritual needs shape political movements, how individual desires for transformation can be channeled into collective action, and how new forms of meaning-making emerge in times of institutional decline. Perhaps most crucially, we need to explore alternatives to tribal consciousness and self-deception that characterize our current moment. The story of MAGA and the new civil religion isn't just about Trump or contemporary politics. It's about the everlasting human search for meaning, purpose, and transcendence in an increasingly uncertain world.
Oh. I have so many thoughts competing to come to the front of my brain tissue. The first thing that I think of is, Randy Woodley. So many times in 2016, I heard him say, if you think Trump's the problem, you haven't understood the problem. And I think that that's still true. But the way that you've written this summary and engaged the material really does start to creep me out a little bit, that this is the pointy end of the spear, right? But that there's actually so much material and momentum behind it that it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it makes me think this came out of thinking about our conversation, like, oh, well, what's this draw of these new conservative, religious impulse, or these kind of, going back there. And I thought, but it's not the same, right? So you have a whole lot of people embracing a conservative religious identity and they don't actually practice it. So like whatever it means to embrace this identity didn't include like dramatic changes in church attendance,
Yeah.
But it did include attaching one's identity tribally to a political movement, right? And so, like, how do you get Muslims, Jews, and Hindus in America saying they're evangelical? You know, you only get a growing number of people in those other traditions saying they're evangelical, because evangelical means a spiritual, religious, political fusion kind of thing that has content to it. That content is a tribe, but it's not one. It's not like it's theologically set. But what even authorizes someone from another religion to, like? Why would a Muslim be like, I'm an evangelical Muslim? What does that? Well, part of it, I think, is realizing that modernity's generated this context of self-creation. Like, when we've really disenchanted custom, or all the way down to any institutions or even science or whatever, then all things are authorized internally. Oh, I'm going to be authentic. This is my vibes. This is my truth. Insert any of that. Then and then the MAGA community's like, that's great. I'm glad we got all these people in Michigan to vote for Trump because they're worried about Kamala not being clear on Palestine. Or they can be evangelicals too. So like, whatever's going on the way we describe our identities, it has been so detached that you get Christians who are pissed if someone reads the Sermon on the Mount at church. And people of almost every other religion in America saying they're evangelical, and they don't go to a church or believe any of the things. And in a political party where, like, the people that left it are like, WTF? Like, if you've got like socialists going, I just wish we had W around, just a good old normal war criminal as president. Or where's Mitt Romney when you need him? If you're not in the cult, then you're like, is this what we signed up for? Like, what's going on? And I think it's too easy for us to get, like, I wanted to think about, what is it that makes his power work? And then when I read Tara Isabella Burton's book on like this genealogy of manifesting, and then you go, oh, well, why are all these people being caught up in something called evangelical that from other religious traditions? It has nothing to do with their practice. It has to do with something else, that they're finding an identity in a community because Trump's manifesting this whole thing.
This is fascinating. Hey, a possible topic for next week. So as I've been listening to you read this, I've had this question in my brain for about 3 months, but as I'm listening to you here, I would love to present to you an idea that I've been working on. Which is, are the evangelicals the new chaplains of the empire?
Ooh.
And if so, what are the implications for that?
What's the chance they aren't? I mean, they might not be the chaplain if they're just like the jester, getting tooled around. I was going to say something else. They aren't cool enough to be the jester. I was just trying to decide if we would get banned if I said what I thought.
That was funny. But here's the thing, man. In the same way that Niebuhr, right back in his day, was had the president's ear, right? And the mainline churches, right, in the social gospel were at their ascendancy, right? Like the church that I'm in now, and churches all over the country like it, it was called the main line of Christianity. The reason it was the main line after World War II is it was the largest and fastest growing because it was most similar to the culture around it. So I'm wondering if they are the new chaplains of the empire, and if so, what does that mean? All right, I'm going to work it up. Work it up.
All right. Well, then you tell me if I'm supposed to do anything before it. If you're like, because I can already just feel within me an energy that will probably elicit some responses. I'm optimistic.
This has been really fun. I gotta confess, I was I am trumped out. So I was not excited that we were going to be talking about this, even though I knew you were really excited. This was far more interesting and came with some material that I have never seen formulated in this way before. This was a far better discussion than I even thought was possible about this topic.
Well, I mostly was like, when I read books I'm interested in, now I'm like, is there any part of this that connects to anything that normal people are talking about, so I can talk about it? And it's that whole genealogy and manifesting, and then how it plays out in culture, that I find really fascinating. But you could do the same thing. You could do the same analysis and then do it as a critique of the way like identitarian politics functions on the left, right? Like it's you could easily pick identitarian politics as a new kind of civil religion, and it functions on the same spiritual principles that are there. It's just
and oh man, there's so I know we're over an hour and a half, but I just want to say there are so many parallels between policing boundaries, litmus tests, conformity standards, absolutism, peer pressure.
Yep. It's that in the episode we did sometime over the summer about like the culture of control, the whirlpool one, and we talked about like the culture of control, and when I got to like how control functions in culture, you could give out like purity tests, cancel culture, all these kinds of things, and then there are versions of it for each tribe, right? And it's like what is the assumption about the self and tribal identity that makes like tribal self maintenance inherently deteriorous to the well-being of the whole.
Cool.
Exciting.
Hey, I want to tell you, I'm headed to a meeting, but I want to tell you why I'm so excited about it. One, I told you that I've been finding new partners, right? One of the ones that we're talking to today, we haven't met yet, but they know that we're doing this sort of thing and they caught wind of it, is a group called Girls on the Run. And it's an empowerment group that uses motion and movement and strengthening to build girls' both self-esteem and their community connection to each other. And so that we have a meeting coming up, but I needed to go clean up all my paint supplies because the whole place smells. The smell is so strong in here. So I got to go clean up my paint supplies so that when that group gets here, it doesn't reek fresh paint.
You don't want to go have a group huffing?
Well, just because it's I don't know if you can hear, I'm a little stuffed up, and I think it has something to do with the paint fumes. But
all right. I hope your nose doesn't start bleeding in the middle of the meeting. They're like,
that would look suspicious, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't be the first time, though.
All right. I'll talk to you later, Bo. Bye. Thank you all for joining live, and we'll see you soon.